Here's a sneak peek from today's episode.
There's so much that you can measure with content. You can measure visits, you can measure engagements, you can measure shares, like whatever. But if those things don't ladder back to your business objectives, nobody's going to care.
Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined by Allison. Allison, welcome to the show.
Hi, great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Allison, I'm excited for the conversation. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think a lot of people are going to be able to relate with this subject today. But Allison, before we dive into that, let's get to know you. I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, kind of your career, fun things like that. And then we ask every guest, what do you love about content and marketing?
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you for having me. I was so excited when you reached out to me. Like I said, when we were kind of getting to know each other, I am super passionate about content and just kind of the opportunities that come with working in content and content marketing. Love the topic and excited to dive in. But in terms of a little bit about me, so I am currently the Chief Marketing Officer at In People Credit Union. We are headquartered in the Quad Cities. We're about just over $2 billion in assets right now, which is how credit unions kind of measure their value. And I've been there about 9 months now. I've been in credit union land, as we call it, for just over a decade. And I got my start actually in content marketing at a small agency serving financial services clients. So I fell into marketing through an internship and just really fell in love with it. And like I said, started out as a content marketer myself, writing long form content for financial services companies. Did that for a while and then kind of got sick of working in agency life and moved over to client side in credit unions. I just fell into the credit union mission and this idea of people helping people and really trying to help people better their life through their finances. And that just really spoke to me. So I was doing social media and content for a really large credit union based in Chicago, but serving people nationwide, and worked my way up through that organization up to director of brand management and marketing, overseeing everything, including content marketing, but content and brand, marketing technology, public relations, all that good stuff. And from there, went over to another credit union, became the VP of marketing there, and then currently my organization is a CMO. So, like I said, this topic is really near and dear to my heart because I started out as a content marketer. And in terms of what I love about marketing, what excites me about marketing, I'm a learner at heart. Like I love to learn new things, and that's really what fuels me. And so I think just the opportunity being in marketing to learn about not just marketing, but so much about your business and so much about, consumers and what matters to them. Like that to me is the most exciting thing about marketing and what gets me going. I'm super psyched to talk to you.
I love it. So before we dive into today's subject, I have one more question for you because I love your background and everything that you talked about. You started out on the content side of things. You've moved all the way up to a CMO position. I really have a strong belief that this is the future of how marketing leadership is going to kind of come from, what their history and roots are going to be. I know right now a lot of it comes from demand generation, but how do you feel like that content pathway helped you work your way up into the CMO position?
It's a great question. And I am biased, obviously, but I agree with you. I think there was a lot. So I think being in content marketing, you do need to understand so much about the business. And I think, we'll get into this as we dive deeper into some of the topics we're going to cover today, but you need to understand so much about what's important to your stakeholders, what's important to your business strategy, and really get in the weeds of some of that to create content that has any value. And so I think that to me was one huge piece that I've leveraged throughout my career I think in other parts of marketing, you don't necessarily get that exposure. If you're managing a channel or something like that, like you're not necessarily, and you could, but you're not necessarily required to understand the business the way you are in content marketing. And so I think that has been a big thing. And to your point, I think is a big reason why content can be kind of a starting point for a lot of folks who want to move up through the ranks and, up to the executive level. So I think you just get such a wide range of exposure to different parts of the business that you might not elsewhere. And so that to me is the thing that has really helped me put all the pieces together to kind of get me to where I am right now.
I love that. That's amazing.
Yep.
So today we're going to have a fun discussion about a topic that I think a lot of people in content are focused on, really proving and measuring content's value to your business.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously with your background and your experience right now, marketing kind of has to justify everything they do. You have to be able to put a number to it. I mean, the CFO would love to say dollar in and dollar out and things like that. Allison, how do you look at proving and measuring all of that stuff when it comes to content? What does that look like?
Yeah. So this is something that I was super excited to talk about because I think this is something that I learned over time and was painful. And, if I had an opportunity to kind of like help somebody jump start a little bit, I would love to do that. So, I think it starts with, and at least for me and my teams, it starts with, again, that understanding of the business and what are your goals and objectives. I think it's easy as somebody who is creative and excited about developing content to start developing things just because they're cool or just because you get inspired by something somebody else is doing. And then you think to yourself, oh man, we could do that if we just did this and this and this. And, you go kind of down a path and then you're creating this really cool piece of content, but then your CFO or your CMO or your CEO comes to you and says like, hey, how much time did you spend on this? Like, what did we get out of it? And you don't really know. And that's like a really scary place to be, especially as a junior marketer, junior, content creator. And so I always encourage people, and I have always, spent a lot of time with my stakeholders, spent a lot of time with the strategic plan, if there is one, to really understand what are we trying to do as a business? What are we trying to do? How do the different business units support this vision? And that to me is the first step, because if you don't understand that, nothing you create is going to be measured in a way that is impactful. And that's harder to do. I mean, it's easy for me to say that where I'm sitting now, but that's harder to do when you are, individual contributor in an organization, because you're being fed the strategic plan through your leadership. And so the more that you can get out in the business and just talk to people and understand their different areas and how they support these business goals, super, super important. So that's the first step, is I think understanding, what are the goals and objectives of the organization, near term and long term. And then, I like to use just a kind of a plan on the page framework where I set out some objectives that support that business plan, that, those business goals. So those can look different depending on what your business goals are, but really set out those objectives very clearly in, every piece of content that we're creating. We're trying to fulfill these three objectives. So maybe it's just as simple as, we want to make more millennials aware of our brand. Like that, it can be something simple like that, but a clear objective that you can have in your mind every time you create a piece of content, not grasping at straws. You're doing something because you have this objective in mind. So I kind of put those objectives right there at the top of my plan on the page, and then align, 3 to 5 goals to those objectives. And those goals, can be, I would say they're not tactical in nature, right? They're not, I want to get 700 likes on a post. Like that's not it. The goal is really something that's more, I want to draw in, a certain percentage of people to my blog or whatever. And then your tactics underneath that are the more granular things that you're going to execute on every day, every week, every month. And then at the bottom of that page, I put, what are my metrics associated to that goal? And those metrics, and I find this framework really helpful because if I can look at those metrics and they don't tie back to those objectives clearly, and they don't tie back to those business goals clearly, I don't need to be measuring it. It's really easy. There's so much that you can measure with content. You can measure visits, you can measure engagements, you can measure shares, like whatever. But if those things don't ladder back to your business objectives, nobody's going to care. So I think that that's the first thing. I was like really getting clear on what am I doing? How am I measuring it? And how do those measurements correlate to what we're measuring at the very top? So that's the first thing. And I know that that's not revolutionary by any means, but I do think, and I have found that like that, those steps get skipped completely a lot of the time in content development. So I think taking a methodical approach to why you're doing what you're doing is super important. And the first step to kind of tying together the ROI. So that's the first thing. And then I think, you need to get into where you can. So one measurement that I really like is ad equivalency. So this is something that like I just stumbled upon in public relations actually, but we were presenting a public relations kind of like strategy to our senior leadership team. This is when I think I was a manager at this time. And I had this tool that showed me, where had we been placed and how many impressions and all these things. And like, that's helpful for me to know, but my CEO does not care about our impressions. That means nothing to him. And so I was kind of just going through my reports and I stumbled upon this one. It was called ad equivalency. And it was, okay, how much would it have cost me to buy these eyeballs? And I thought, this seems like it's probably going to be important. What I'm showing here is I've saved this much money by creating, this or, doing this earned media or creating this organic content. And so I put that in my presentation, and that slide became a slide that my CEO, and I was a manager at the time, my CEO used in every board report because it showed very clearly, hey, marketing is doing this and they're generating this much and we're not paying for it. So I think finding those, and I think ad equivalency is a really good one. Like you could make it up too. And I don't mean literally make it up. Like you need to use a formula, but you could easily figure out, all right, how much does it cost me to buy ads for this much impression, this many impressions on Google, and how many impressions did I get on my piece of content? And it didn't cost me anything. And here's what the ad equivalency is. I think that like metrics like that are super powerful to those in leadership because they show the actual value of what you're doing. I think we as content marketers get really excited about, oh, so many people saw it or, so many people engaged with it. But you need to take that next step to business outcome. And it doesn't always have to be leads because we know that, you put a piece of content out there, it's not going to generate, thousands of leads right away, right? Like that's not how it works. So I think finding those metrics that show really like, here's how much this would have cost if we had to buy it, or, here's how much more efficient we are because we've created this piece of content. Now we can use it in sales and in, across all these different business functions. So I think it really becomes about showing the business value of the content that you're developing, whether that's through efficiency or whether that's through that sort of equivalent, ad spend. So that's kind of a lot, but I think that's really what it boils down to. And then the one thing that I would say is so important as a content marketer, the marketer in general, like don't wait for people to ask you what you're doing. Don't wait for people to ask you why you're doing it and what the impact of your activities are. Proactively share that story. And so that's why going back to that strategic plan, I think that's so important because once you have that, you know what you're going to report on, you understand how it corresponds to the business goals, and then you just need to share that on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis. Be proactive about that. If no one's asked you for it yet, like do it because it will show people will start asking more questions and they'll expect more of you, but you want that. You want people to expect things of the marketing team, of the content team, and you want people to see the great work that you're doing. So yeah, I think that being proactive and telling the story about how what you're doing is driving business value before that question gets asked is really super important because if people are asking you, it may be too late for you. So you gotta be proactive and start telling them now.
I agree 100%. I love that last standpoint where if people are starting to say, hey, wait, what's going on here? They're already questioning you and they probably already had 5 discussions saying, I'm not sure this is worth it anymore. I love everything you just said. I think there's so many powerful insights there. And you really talked about this cool progression. Okay, the business is trying to accomplish this goal. And because of that goal, we have a content strategy. And based off of that strategy, here are the tactics that we're going to implement. Here's how we're going to measure success. And I am going to report that back up to say, hey, you want this? Here's how we're going to accomplish it with content. And by the way, had you had to pay for all of this, it would have cost you all of this money. Like, this is something that's really powerful. I think that that is a great framework. I think that the ad equivalency is one of the greatest metrics that hardly anyone uses. If you really want a hard number to your content, it's one of the best ways. So if your blog is getting 100,000 visitors a month, there's a big number showing you how much that traffic would have cost you. And I think that that would be really eye-opening for a lot of executives at a company to see the value. But at the same time, it's not just, hey, we have traffic, prove it's the right traffic, right? The business objective is not just awareness, but it's awareness amongst a certain set of people. So we're going to attract those kinds of people with a strategy, things like that. So one final question, Allison, because I'm really curious. Content isn't just a single, it's not just a blog. It's not just social media. It permeates everything we do in marketing and honestly, the rest of the business. It's business training. It is inside the sales team. It's everywhere. How do you prioritize and measure that impact, even when it's not just marketing's content at the top of the funnel? How are you prioritizing and justifying and focusing on content's potential to impact the customer at every stage of the funnel and in every department of the business?
Yeah. So I think it goes back to that strategy development and that point I made about getting to know your different business units and business unit leadership and what their objectives are. It becomes a lot easier to justify what you're doing from a content standpoint if you've had a bunch of conversations with business unit leadership and understand what they're trying to accomplish. And you've already shared with them, hey, here's some things that we're doing and here's some content that you can probably use, and here's how we can get it to you. And I think having those conversations at the outset become really helpful. And then as you're developing content, as your team is developing content or you yourself are developing content, you have that understanding of what's important to the business and you can think of ways that content can be used in learning and development or in sales and come up with sort of a management system to get that out there, right? So just a simple example, I was just talking yesterday to our VP of business development and we were talking about just simply, hey, we create this social media calendar every month. You all need content that you need to send out to your contacts on a regular basis. Why don't we just share our social media calendar with you? You can take a look at it and you can say, hey, I'm going to take, these things and I'm going to send them to my contacts. So I think, to your question about prioritization, that to me comes from the business strategy and understanding what that is. But in terms of actually distributing the content across the different businesses, I think the more you understand what people are trying to do, the easier it becomes to just plug people into what you're doing. And it doesn't have to be overly complex. It does not have to be a series of 10 meetings and, this just complex framework of things. It can be as simple as sharing, hey, here's where our content is and, go check it out. Here's what we do every month. Grab some of it. And so I do think I'm beating a dead horse here, but I think the most important thing you can do as a content marketer is understand your stakeholders and their business objectives because everything becomes easy for you if you're having those conversations. It becomes way easier for you to get your content out there and share it with people. You'll probably have people asking for it. If they've talked to you and they understand what you're doing and they know you understand their business, your job will become a lot easier because people are just going to be coming to you saying, hey, I know you're doing this. Can you get me in on that? Instead of you trying to figure out how to do that.
I love it. And I think that's a great stopping point for us. We try to keep these episodes short and sweet. Cool. Allison, thank you so much for the insights and the time today. If anyone listening today wants to reach out and connect with you online, how and where can they find you?
You can search for me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to do it. But I would love to chat with anyone and everyone who is curious or has questions. So yeah, find me on LinkedIn and let's chat.
Perfect. And anyone listening, we will link to Allison's profile on LinkedIn in the show notes. So just scroll down and you can click there. Again, Allison, thank you so much for the insights and time today. Really, really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.